They always have in the media that black children inherently have lower IQs. They always show these studies of black children's IQs being lower, but what they leave out is that African immigrants, they come over to America and they outperform everybody else academically, including Asians and including whites.
Because first of all, IQ is so culture-based. I mean, IQ doesn't exist. And the evidence of that is just look around you. Because if that's the case, Europeans ain't doing that great either. Because compared to the world, out of 166 countries that was tested, the United States of America, European American students, there was only 12 countries did worse than the United States of America. So IQ, it has nothing to do with, that's a lot of game.
First, the concept of IQ, the intelligence quotient, comes out of Germany during the rise of Hitler. It was a German white man by the name of Wilhelm Stern who created the intelligence quotient for population extermination reasons. He was later rejected and put out of Hitler's camp, but the IQ is an invention of Nazi Germany. Now, the first IQ test ever used in the world comes out of France. A European named Alfred Binet, at the request of the French government, was asked to design a test whereby the French government could group or track the students based on how bright they were and identify those who they felt would not be successful in school at all. A white man from New Jersey, Henry H. Goddard, who was a member of the American Eugenics Society, went to France, got a copy of the Binet scales, first white IQ test, brought the Binet scales back to America, made copies of it, and distributed it across the country to white folks everywhere. And Henry H. Goddard himself said that with this tool, we will be able to accomplish our eugenicidal ends. So from the beginning, the IQ test was never meant as an objective standard to see how smart black kids was. It was used to justify access to opportunity and extermination and racial control.
And they're not being taught. I have a boy, Hassan, he's 10, and I took him to school, and he was at the genius level because I had taught him at home. You know, he was like 7 years old, he had an IQ of 153. Well, they made sure they dumbed him down, and 2 years later, he was barely passing. I had to take him, I said, and I fought with him every day.
They snatched it. It's like when our children in school are saying that, you know, when somebody's real smart, they say, oh, you acting white. They don't understand that people that look like them invented thinking. In fact, we were thinking before Europeans were even on the planet. Yet we don't know this about ourselves. And because our children are not familiar with this history of themselves, they can't see themselves because they're taught that slaves came from Africa. And so therefore, I'm going to act like a slave because that's who I am. But they don't see themselves as Imhotep, or they don't see themselves as Queen Nzinga, or Preshet, a second dynasty female doctor, or they don't see themselves as Hypatia, a great mathematician and medical doctor that was skinned alive by the Romans because they did not want to show an African woman being so intelligent, and dragged her through the community to show people what they were going to do to this African woman.
The African man and the African woman's mind does not operate along European paradigmal structures. So if you're teaching him one way, he's going to automatically fail. If the system is structured for him to fail, of course he's going to fail. He's going to say, see, I told you. That's ridiculous. We know that genius is definitely and always has been in the African mind, because everywhere you go on the planet, you see African genius once left to its own accord. But when manipulated, you could turn him or that genius in her into something that is demonic. Back in 1964, they created a whole other way of teaching your son. It was called outcome-based education. It wasn't about you learning math and knowing what math was. 1 and 1 equals 2. 2 was the answer. If you got 3, you were wrong. But today, if 1 and 1 and you said 3, you said, oh, you tried. It's all right. We'll pass you on. That's all right. You did your best. See, so what they did was, in outcome-based education, it became more feminized. It became more of a communal participation in the act or idea of learning, not learning. If you could come together and participate in group things, that showed that you had the ability to be passed on into the new society. If you were a rogue and you jumped out and said, no, I ain't going for this, which is where all the gangs started coming from, because most of the males could not deal in an education system that was like this. And this is why you see most of the females getting the PhDs today, because the system was structured in such a way that took away the challenge that men needed.
And it was through the IQ test, which is the #1 weapon of special education, they continue to overdiagnose and misdiagnose black children as being mentally retarded who are not. I had a case in Philadelphia this past summer right here. Some white lawyers asked me to come in and participate in the case. Black boy, 8th grade, diagnosed as mentally retarded. I evaluated the brother, found out he was never mentally retarded. But when I looked into the previous IQ tests that were given, they misinterpreted the data. So this young man been walking around with a diagnosis of mental retardation since he was in 8th grade. He's now a young adult. And although he's been told by me and his parents that you are not retarded and you were never retarded, the self-esteem, the self-concept, the self-image is so crushed. This brother probably gonna need therapy for the next 20 years because he bought into what? A superficial label that white society has given them. The gifted movement really started to take form right after the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. The Supreme Court said you could no longer use race as a factor to segregate groups, but they didn't say you couldn't use disability or ability. So the white folks said, guess what? We're gonna come up with a gifted program. We're gonna segregate the white kids from the black kids after Brown versus Board, because we're gonna say the white kids are too smart. It's not based on skin, it's based on ability. Problem with that, it didn't work too well because a lot of white kids didn't score high on the IQ test. So they said, guess what? This is working for some white kids, but it ain't working for all. So guess what? In 1963, the same year that the Civil Rights Bill was introduced, a Chicago psychologist created the learning disability. The learning disability. And it is through the IQ test and the learning disability that so many of our children are marshaled into special ed kids where they'll probably never learn to read on grade level by the time they graduate.